Good morning.
It's been a while.
It has. We're a little out of shape. Yeah, just got to clear the pipes out.
Yeah. You know a little more than me about that, don't you?
Man, I can't believe we didn't do this more often.
I don't know why we wouldn't have. I mean,
No, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome.
Welcome back.
Yeah, to What the Hell is Water?
That's the name of the show.
Yeah. You know, it's our first time doing this in a while. I don't know. Were we guessing 6-8 months or something?
Yeah, something like that. It's been quite a while.
We're going to be vulnerable today, so we needed space.
Yeah. We were talking the other day about getting back into fighting shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like feeling like you're the old man at the gym who's lost a step. Yeah, so please bear with us today because this is going to be rough.
Unless that's how you like it, and and that's why
Unless
we're
the
here.
comedy is
Yes.
us failing repeatedly.
Yes, and that's why
yeah.
we're here. We're here to fail for you.
Yeah. So yeah, laugh at us, not with us.
Yeah, so today marks episode 107. So although it's been a while since we've done it, we got in a lot of reps doing this. Yeah, and so, we're good. We promise. You can trust us.
Yeah, we will be good in 3 more episodes, but stick with us today so
Right.
you can watch our improvement. It'll be yeah.
So today, we wanted to do a special kind of episode where we are kicking off a new series. And one of the things, one of the reasons I started What the Hell is Water to begin with was I was having trouble just getting content out the door and starting to publish things. And, surprise, surprise, one of that was strongly related to how I thought about things and how I felt about things, and not being ready to press that publish button on the thing that I'm working, but a little bit of those perfectionist tendencies. And in case you're curious about how much I feel about that, I have a whole episode where I think I was basically sobbing on camera. I still haven't seen it yet, but we'll plug
Still
that
haven't
one.
hit publish on that one.
Oh, it's out there. I just haven't watched it
okay.
myself. So we'll share that episode. But today, sorry, lost my train of thought naturally, which is bound to happen on this show many times.
Yeah, we lose trains a lot.
Yes, exactly. But a lot of the trend of the way the show went before was we would be planning it the day before and sometimes even the morning of. And so we're trying to take a slight shift to do a little bit of more planning in ahead and a little bit of announcing more in advance. And so today we're going to kick off a little series, or a mini series, macro series, whatever you want to call it. Hey Siri. Oh, sorry for everyone. I just triggered.
Yes.
Yes. But it's going to be on mental health and therapy. And, I was thinking, so for today, we're going to kind of brainstorm and we're going to talk about what are all the things that we want to talk about around mental health and therapy, and how do we talk about it in a way that's, welcoming to everyone, and regardless of if you're a woke libtard or you're an ignorant, person who's never even talked about a feeling in their life, right? Like the goal is, did I make you feel welcoming with those attacking terms?
Yeah, right. Like everyone that hasn't logged off or started commenting right now.
Yeah.
Like, thank you.
Yeah, you're here still. But the goal is to talk about it in a way where it's like, hey, look, I've been paying attention to mental health and therapy for years and years and years. Like, you're going to get some out of this, and also hopefully you can help contribute to the conversation. And then people who have never even thought about talking about their feelings, like, first of all, I don't think anything's wrong with any of you. And that's, I think, the first kind of big myth that's out there that makes this topic so approachable, is people feel like something is wrong with them. But we'll get more into that in a little bit. So we're going to brainstorm today. We're going to talk about all the different ways we want to talk about it. And then we're going to spread that out over a handful of episodes. That way we have time and space to tackle each of those things. And then also time for you guys out there to contribute to the conversation, whether that be live or whether that be after the fact, in the comments, or potentially in something called a Rome graph, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So before we dive in, though, I was like, okay, maybe we could riff on a couple of names. And right before I walked in here, I had one pop in my head. So we'll see what you think. And I was thinking that we should call it Get in Head with Ryder and Reed. Get in head. It's all about getting in the head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How could that ever be misinterpreted?
Yeah.
I'm thinking now of Arrested Development, where his license plate said analrapist, because he is an analyst and a therapist.
Nice.
But of course, it looks like anal rapist.
Yeah.
Yeah. What could possibly and he written a book too that was called like The Man Inside Me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And of course, this makes me think of the amazing bit, SNL bit, where it's the Jeopardy spoof, and it's Will Ferrell, and he's as if he is what's the main dude's name? Alex Trebek.
Yeah.
And and then there's, I forget which the character is, but we'll share a link to this later when we find it. But it's, the category is Let It Snow, and then the dude's like, I think it might be Burt Reynolds or something, I don't know. He's like, let it snow for 500.
That's the best part of Instagram, actually, is SNL
Lit tits now?
clips.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that, well, shh.
Well, we'll noodle on the name. If you have anything else pop up, let us know. And you guys in the comment too if you have some fun name. One of the things we like to do is have a name that's memorable, maybe a little bit silly, maybe a little bit sexual, because it gets people thinking, it gets people wondering, gets people feeling.
Provocative.
It's provocative, yes. But without further ado, let us go ahead and run our intro, and then we'll jump into the show.
Helpful for life.
And we're back. Welcome to What the Hell is Water? This is episode 107. Today is October 20th, 2022, the year of our Lord. I think that's how some people say it.
Is that what they say?
I don't know. And also with you.
Sorry, drawing complete blanks
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
I'm so confused by this year of our Lord stuff.
Yeah,
I
sometimes
guess
I don't know
are
either.
all years the year of our Lord?
I don't know. It's a good question. We'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
see what he thinks.
bud.
Yeah, coming soon. Discussion on religion. We'll
How
link
to
that
get
below at
answers
some
when you
point.
pray. Yeah.
All right, Ryder. So let's just go ahead and jump in, and I have my little fancy tablet thing here where we're gonna do some drawing and
Help if
stuff.
I do this.
Yeah, and what we'll do is I say let's just take 5-10 minutes and let's just talk about all of the various ways angles we kind of want to talk about it, and then after that we'll see if there's maybe some grouping we want to do, see if that makes us think of some sort of structure or whatnot. But again, this is meant to just kind of be an open brainstorming session, and if you're here in the chat, you happen to be here live, welcome. Hi, how's it going? And please let us know your thoughts, ideas, any questions you have. And if you're after the fact, make sure to let us know in the comments. And then if we share a Roam link in the description later, we may do that, may not. Honestly, I'm not sure. Check that one out too. So let's just start off with a 5-10 minute thing, and then we'll go from there. And I'll just kind of jot down some of this stuff.
Sure. Okay, so my first thought when I think about therapy is I think I went once when I was younger, and that was sort of like through school and stuff like that, right? And it was to sort of work out some issues or something that were going on. So there's like being introduced to it when you're a kid and sort of then not knowing what to do with it socially, culturally, everything else. Then there's the sort of method that I was mostly taught, which is to just power through things. And what I would kind of want, like, unfortunately, so much of this is going to be biographical, but the powering through, and then the idea that you can somehow educate yourself around the aspect of it. Like they say this about a lot of psychologists, is they actually get into it to fix themselves, and then later they work with other people, right? So there is this self-help aspect to it. It's like if you read the right books, if you do the right things, you don't have to go to therapy. There's also always a cost with therapy, and that's a bit of a hurdle to overcome if you don't have insurance, if you don't have something like that that covers it, or the person isn't in system, I think is the term they use in insurance realm, then it can be very expensive, like prohibitively expensive. And that doesn't even get into how we feel about therapy. That's just like the literal cost of, like, if you're in a small town, who is your therapist? We now have technological solutions to therapy that didn't exist before. You can do digital, you can do virtual, you can do all these things which just weren't around previously. There's also the problem of Christian therapy.
Yeah.
And that being an entire thing unto itself. There's also Jungian therapy, there's Freudian, there's all these different styles of it, and each one of them sort of caters and has a different framework. And so getting into which ones you want to use or are comfortable using, and looking for whatever kind of results you want out of that. All that's kind of fascinating because some of them embed you back into pain, and other ones try to pull you out of it. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, of course, a bunch of like more functional ways to go through therapy and like learn about yourself and like tips and tricks to help you whenever you're in the moment.
Yeah, so let me pause you for a second. Sorry to cut you off midstream.
No, it's good.
I wanted to make sure we mentioned this. So disclaimer for you guys. neither of us are therapists, nor do we have any psychology degrees or anything like that. The purpose of this show is to get you guys thinking about things. You know, the official legal disclaimer is that this is for informational and informational and entertainment purposes only. So we encourage you guys to talk with a licensed, not physical, help me out here with the term.
Mental health
yeah,
expert?
like licensed mental health expert or psychologist or psychiatrist, something like that. And of course, also, a lot of people don't realize, but one easy way to start this conversation is actually during your annual physical, which I know a lot of you don't get, so I'll strongly encourage you to get that. But when you're there, just say like, hey, I would like to talk to someone about mental health. And actually, some doctors are doing that now as part of their physical. They'll do a depression and anxiety screening. I've seen that over in the past years, which is good. But the bottom line about our disclaimer is we're here to tell you guys a lot about our own experiences, about experiences from people in our lives. And so just a quick disclosure on kind of the privacy of that. Like, we're going to talk a lot about stuff in our own lives, and we're going to talk about some people in our lives, and we'll also we'll be compositing experiences from different people in our lives. So the bottom line in all this is if you feel like this is talking at you or about you, like, I encourage you to push through that initial like fight of like, oh, grr, like why, that's not me or whatever. If you feel something like that inside, like one of the things we'll talk about, I'm sure, is paying attention to how your body feels when certain actions happen or certain things are said. Like, if you feel something, that's a good time to pay attention and listen and try and absorb. So I want to make sure you guys think about that, because regardless of who I'm talking about, regardless of who Ryder's talking about, the whole goal here is for us to share our experiences with you and experiences of other people in our life to help you guys navigate through your lives and help you guys learn from other people. And then I think it's very worth saying that we are both very adamant readers, podcast listeners, YouTubers, and audiobooks, all that kind of stuff. We've dove into mental health a good bit, each of us, especially over the last few years. Yep. And I've been going to therapy now for, I don't know, 6-8 months, something like that. Both couples therapy and individual therapy, and all. And I did some additional something called an emotional fitness class last year, and we can dive some more into our specific history, but real briefly, just yours.
Yeah, it's kind of similar in that started during the pandemic, took a little break, and I'm back into it now. I've done some couples therapy. I've been doing group therapy, which is a slight different thing. When I was younger, I think I went to 2 different therapists, and those were very short, like 1 or 2 session kind of things. And yeah, then there's I was also going to mention, as you were talking about doctors and physicians, there's kind of 2 realms. In the self-help realm, there's always this kind of idea of meditation, which is a kind of bit of self-help, but there's also the physician route or medication route, which is you go through the system and you medicate to deal with different things, because there are chemical reactions. So it becomes bodily as well as mental. So your mental health is also body health. And that's just something I wanted to sort of bring up, because there's also reluctance to medication, which is interesting today. And we need to have probably a whole session on that in itself.
Yeah, I will agree. So I think that takes care of a little bit of our disclaimer and a little bit of background on both of us and some of our experience. And of course, as part of this series, we may end up bringing on some guests as well. We may not, and we may do it in the future. We don't know. That's kind of part of this whole brainstorming session, and as the weeks go on. So if you guys want to see something or have, certain people that you think we should have a conversation with, whether that be live, or another thing we may do some of is, some asynchronous stuff, which is where, say, we record a video and then we send it to someone and then they record one and send it back at some point, or they respond via text or whatnot. And so we encourage you guys to send us stuff too. If you have thoughts on this, again, make sure you can put it in the comments below. You can also send us an email to team at helpfulforlife.com. So you guys can send us an email to team@helpfulforlife.com, and you can specify in there, I want to remain anonymous, or I'm okay sharing my name. It could be a video, it could be a story, written out, it could be a picture, whatever works for you. The main thing I ask is that you try and remove any personally identifiable information of other people in your life, because regardless of how you're sharing, we want to make sure to respect the privacy of the people who are not involved in that conversation. Any thoughts on that, or
No, that's yeah. Anonymizing things is good because this is a subject that is still taboo in a lot of circles, and people's feelings are interestingly easy to hurt, right?
Yeah.
Like we have all these things we say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yet I would rather be hit with a stick,
Yeah.
than
Well, I mean,
words.
we're not talking sexual stuff here, so
Yeah, reel it in, reel it in.
next series. All right. So with that being said, let's jump back to some of our brainstorming. And I'm just gonna spit out some more stuff, and then I'll let you just kind of, this is the way we'll brainstorm. We'll just list out a bunch of stuff, and then we'll try and extract the thing. So, one of the things that I want to talk about is what I'll call the logic feeling spectrum. And we can dive more into that, but basically how logic is on one end and emotion is on the other end, and what side of the spectrum is it good to be on or bad to be on? And the trick answer is it's not good or bad to be on either side, but you just should know the pros and cons of being on each side and how to tap into each side of it. So that's one thing that I had in mind. Another one is the process of getting into therapy and why we all avoid it so much. That just a quick little teaser on that. Like for me, I've been a fan of therapy for a very long time, and I have even said, both to myself and to others, like, hey, I recognize that therapy is a really good thing. It's helpful for pretty much anyone. I think you should get into it before you have major problems. It's kind of like with your car. Like you should change your oil before your oil dries up, But the thing is with therapy is like there's all these, again, talk about the feelings versus logic. Like logically, I was 1,000% in on therapy. But for whatever reason, my body, my heart, my soul, whatever, resisted that forever. And it took me curling up on a couch for like good chunks of multiple days to finally then ask for help from Danielle, my wife. I was like, Danielle, for whatever reason, I don't know why I can't just press that button and sign up, but will you do that for me? And she did, and I'm very glad. And now my life is completely changed because of that. And again, I will tell you, on the logical emotional spectrum, I'm all the way on that logic side. Like I'm hyper logical. And if the hyper logical guy is hesitating so much to do the thing that he already thought was good, I was like, well, there's something there. Like there's some sort of resistance there where it's like, I don't know. I still don't even know today, even now that I've after been in therapy, why I didn't do it. And that gap is the gap that a lot of people never cross. And then they suffer the rest of their lives because of it. So that ties into one other aspect of it, which is the concept that, and I don't remember who said this quote, so if we can find it, we'll attribute it later, but wherever you go, there you will be. And that's the thing that, like, I remember after I heard that, it sunk in really good. And it was like, yeah, I mean, that's the problem and the benefit of dealing with your own mental health and doing therapy for yourself is you get to be your best self around everyone. Or your worst self around everyone.
Right. I mean, this is something else that's fascinating is I think somebody said the other day that like, oh, this is your life today. Like right now, what you're doing is your life. And if you're not sort of moving through that and enjoying that and processing it in a way that you enjoy, right? Like if you cannot make part of this day somehow, I don't know, there's always chores, there's always things you may not like to do, but you can really kind of focus and change your mind frame on things. But it's tough to do when you're not healthy, when you don't have energy and stuff like that. So I think we should look into this resistance and this like holding up inside of ourselves that happens whenever we're not feeling good. I did have a little bit of a mind glitch for a second because we didn't mention any of the sort of negatives about therapy. There are actually negatives to therapy as well as positives, and we should probably get into some of those. There is a more philosophical idea that the what we're looking for is a whole individual, a whole self, and this idea of singularity and access and the authentic you whenever we're getting into therapy. And there's this other problem with that, which is that we're all a multiplicity of selves all the time. And the idea that we somehow need to unify all that is maybe a monomyth of our current culture.
Yeah.
So
real quick, just to, change some of those words. Multiplicity meaning that we're not just one person in a lot of ways. We are a lot of different personalities, and different types of those personalities will show up at different times, and a lot of times you may not want them to.
Yeah. And so, but it is interesting to think that maybe the person who does not give in to therapy, who does not normalize in society, is somebody who has held on to their individuality the most. And we're in a society that privileges individuality. So I think these are kind of interesting concepts to get wrapped up in that complicate what therapy is actually doing. Because if therapy is an emotional normalization tool that makes you okay with living in a world that's toxic, well, then we need to be able to discuss the toxicity of the world that is also getting us into this situation. So those are all just like some slight pushbacks into this kind of realm of like, why do we need therapy? Is it a replacement for community? Is it a replacement for the church? Do we no longer have these kind of relationships with our elders or friends? What's going on in society that maybe along the same time as industrialization, that therapy has also taken off?
Yeah, and I want to say that this is, I think, where our strengths is we are not therapists. We are not psychologists, as we just said. But both Ryder and myself are the type of people where we've talked previously, and when we were talking about So Good They Can't Ignore Your Range, we'll share an episode or two about that. But there's different types of learning types, and you can think of them like letters. So, for example, and actually I can show over here, one of them would be like an M. And this is saying that you go deep into a couple of areas. So, like, in this case, it's like, oh, I go deep into 3 different areas. Am I that type of learner? Another one is a T, and that's I go really deep and very specific in one area. An example of this would be like, hey, I'm a doctor in, neurobiology specifying in children's cancer or something like that, right? Where it's like I'm hyper deep in one topic, one location.
And it's my whole life.
Yeah. Another one is pi, and then I can't remember any other ones, but
I mean, there's probably an I too.
Yeah,
where it's just like, and I guess if you took the top off, right, of
the
pie, then you're really deep in 2 things, but you're actually schizophrenic. There you are.
There's only 2
people.
things and nothing else in between. But yeah, so that's the point of bringing that up is you and I are typically more of the jack of all trades type, and we do like to dabble in a whole lot of different subjects. And then there are a couple that we do like to dive deeper into.
Yeah, if we were a letter, it would be
yeah, exactly.
A really shallow.
Yes, because over time, like we find an interest, and then we kind of dive into it for a while, and then maybe we move on to something a little different. But for you, I know one of the recurring themes is philosophy and psychology. I know those are pretty big for you.
Yeah, really got in the last few years have gotten just deeper and deeper into the philosophy, sociology, psychology, all that kind of stuff. Just enjoy it for some reason, right?
Yeah,
it's the thing that gets my brain going.
Yeah, and I'll say for me, so I'm an electrical engineer by training, and the way I view my life was the first half of my life I was really focused on learning how stuff works. And then, especially over the last 5 years after I started this company, Helpful for Life, I focused a lot more on how people work and why people do the things they do, and how societies work, and how organizations work. And actually, I kind of blend those 2 things, which is why I like, of course, I like myself. You'll hear me say on the show, I'm a smart guy. I think we need to make a trailer of all the times I've said that on the show.
I think you should start saying, well, I'm not an idiot.
Yeah, I'm not an idiot.
Let's reverse it.
Yeah, I like it. But yeah, and we take this entire approach and look at the entire system, which is a huge thing I like to do, is look at the entire system and say, okay, why, to get back to the point, why are we in this state right now in our society, especially in America, where people's mental health is crap? And obviously, COVID is a big part of that, but there are a lot of other trends involved with where people live, how people work, and how people treat each other, social media, all of these aspects that tie into making you think like you do and making you feel like you do, down to the devices in your pocket. And so we'll talk a lot about those. So kind of like causes for the situation that we're in, if you will. So getting back to our kind of list, let's see here. So we talked about the negatives of therapy. So I want to make this abundantly clear. One of the things in psychology is bias, right? Ryder and I are maybe a little biased towards therapy. We both think it's valuable, and we both think that it's generally good for most people. But our goal with this discussion is to have a very holistic discussion and think through logically, as much as possible, all of the reasons why therapy may be good, may be bad, all of the hurdles you may need to overcome in order to do that. And then, so some of the other things we'll talk about is, hey, how often should you go to therapy?
Right.
And when should you consider switching therapists? What should you look for in a therapist?
And of course, we're not experts again, but we're going to bring people on who will help us with some of that. But yeah, timing is important. There's also a lot of stuff about behavioral science and behavioral economics that have come out, so we can get more into why certain things work better than others, from just sort of a human hacking principle, right? Like, it takes a certain amount of time to develop a habit. It takes a certain amount of conversations for something to actually stick. Psychology is often based around redundancy, for instance. So repeating the same thing over and over again until you can rewire some of those neural net pathways. So let's talk about neuroplasticity. Let's talk about age. Like how if you catch this stuff younger, it might help you rather than catching it when you're 65, right? So we can talk about some of that as well. These are all kind of interesting and fun topics, especially if we don't get super judgmental about them. We're just saying, like, here's the frameworks. If for best practices, let's look at these steps.
Yeah, and I think that the timing of us having this conversation is good, both on kind of the larger scale of where we're at as a society, but also where we're at in the time of year. We are a few weeks away from going into Thanksgiving and going into the holidays, which is a time where a lot of people are around family and friends, and also a time where
So
sometimes
just the times of entire just love and joy.
yeah, exactly.
That's all. Yeah.
Unconditional adoration.
Man. And I have never regressed into a pouting little kid throwing a tantrum.
No, there's never been any stress at all.
I've never had a crash after a family vacation.
Yeah.
No.
So sarcasm aside, the holidays can be a stressful time for a lot of people, and they also include a lot of social gatherings and things like that, which brings up one of the topics that whether or not we talk within this series, we're going to talk about it sometime for sure. And that's the concept of social anxiety, and also just how to be a good friend, how to have good conversations with people. And there's so much of this stuff that's kind of interconnected and related. And it's like, well, I don't really think that's mental health, but it's like, yeah, it totally is.
Yeah, so much of this is that mental health is everything. If this is how you move through the world, is how you perceive the world, and all of that is filtered through your brain and your body, of course, because your body is part of perception. We have embodied cognition and stuff like this that we talk about now, which used to be just totally taboo. There was this idea going back to the logic feeling spectrum that you could override feelings with logic. So we'll jump into that too, because that's a fun one to get into.
Yeah, and then so many things. I lost my train of thought on this one. So yeah, we're gonna.
We lost another train, huh?
Yeah, lost another train out the station.
We're gonna have to go look for those later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? Since that one just went out the door, let's just do kind of a little review here of these things that I jotted down, and I didn't jot down everything, right? Because I'm going as we're going, but let's go ahead and take a look here. So we started off talking about being as a kid, the concept of powering through, the need to fix yourself, self-help, the cost and price aspect, how you feel about therapy, Christian therapy, which I'll say that, at least for me and in my experience and my friend's experience, that's largely been around, let me rephrase, I have not been through Christian therapy. I have friends who've gone through Christian therapy. I'm sure there are issues and pros and cons about other religion therapy as well. So if you guys out there have some stuff you want to share and add, please let us know. I just don't have as much experience with other religious therapies.
Yeah, I have very little.
But some of that stuff will be abstracted, I'm sure, to one religious therapy has some similar problems to other religious therapies.
Yeah, well, and you could even claim that the Freudian and Jungian are also religions unto themselves. There's also Adlerian psychology, right? So we could get into all the different types, and we could break them down into a very easy chart for you to go, this is the focus of each one of these.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning, like, if you're like, I don't know what any of those words mean, don't worry about it. That's kind of entirely the point of all of this, and we're not going to define everything right now and today because time purposes, right? But we will talk about some of the different approaches, and Ryder alluded earlier, like, some get you back into that feeling, some are more about your behavior and stuff today. Another big concept, which we didn't explicitly talk about, but we talked around with a handful of these things, was just the concept of going back to your childhood. Yeah. And that's a thing that I used to like resist a lot as an idea. I'm like, I don't, why would that matter? I don't get it. But then again, like being as an engineer, I started to think about it more from that kind of perspective. And I like to think of a computer, a person like a computer almost. And, nerd, right? But I'm like, okay, well, if you have this computer, and at the end of the day, us humans, even though we have our differences, we're 99.9% the same or whatever, whatever the actual number is.
Yeah.
Something like that, right? We're animals. We have the DNA that's pretty much the same. Yeah. So as special as you think you are, you're still very similar to everyone else, which is another thing, especially in America, where we thrive on this individuality. It's like, oh, that's not me. But it's like, no, that's all animals. You're a human at the end of the day.
So, yeah, we could get into that later. But the idea of difference, and our differences are not nearly as vast as we might think they would be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there are some interesting little loops and pathways you can get caught up in. Mm-hmm. These sort of repetitious moments, and then sometimes going back and looking at why, when you were a child, was this a natural behavior for you, or did this come out of something
or
else?
how your parents treated you, or your almost lack of parents, or your
the jokes about therapy are the same, right?
Yeah.
Like the way you were raised is the coping mechanisms you developed when you were a child are your dysfunctions when you get older. Mm-hmm. And so when you kind of look at it in that lens, then going back to your childhood and going like, oh, that's where it came from, can help you be aware of that dysfunction later.
Yes. And so that, I'm glad you brought that up. And then one other thing I wanted to mention from that was just this aspect of generational issues. Like, that's one huge thing that I can't say enough is like, hey, if you see big problems in your parents or your grandparents, guess what? Unless you just rolled those dice and got real lucky, those problems are probably going to present themselves in you or your siblings or your kids. And so
but what if your parents are just amazing?
Yeah, it's like mine. That too? Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like, and that's as more and more knowledge comes out about psychology and philosophy and all of these things in society, and as the internet and as these tools, as information becomes more readily available, I mean, I'll mention that a lot of people learn a lot about mental health and stuff on things like TikTok. Mm-hmm. And there's some good things about that. There's some bad things about that, which we can talk about that too, about where you learn about these things and how you should approach these things. But the point is as this information becomes more available, as it works its way more into our media, because it's in our TV shows and our movies now, whether or not you realize it. And as people become more okay talking about it, that evidently or effectively changes how people are and changes how society is and changes the next generation of kids. Like, I was talking with a friend the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, my kid's, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 7 or something like that. And he's like, yeah, I see how, he has this anxious tendencies of his mom, or I see how she, is, she's resistant to go hang out with that group of people. And now that, I've been doing my work in therapy, I can see my stuff coming into them or passing on to them. And now I can help them with the techniques and strategies I've learned. So one of the things I like to say, whether it be therapy or music or anything, is a lot of it's just about learning the language so you can have the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. There is a very specific language to all of this, and specific languages have a fantastic role once you understand them. They can act as shorthand for entirely huge concepts. So, yeah, that ought to be pretty good. I think that, man, we could have like an entire episode just throwing out weird language, and then the problem is we're probably gonna be wrong. So even like, we could probably make a list, or y'all can help us make a list. We can throw out there to a psychologist and see how they respond to it.
Yeah. So one of the this is like a type or a concept that we'll touch on at some point, but we hadn't specifically mentioned yet, but something called attachment theory. Have you heard of that one before?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So that one is kind of similar to the kid thing. Oh, so to close the loop on that. So I was saying people are like humans. People are like computers. Well, I have a Mac, you have a Mac, whatever. But what makes that computer work is the operating system and the applications that are put on it. And if you think about it that way, then your parents are the ones who effectively programmed you. Whether or not you like it, they're the ones who put all of those apps on you. And you can uninstall some of them and you can change them. But that takes work, and that takes you recognizing that
there's still going to be limitations with your software.
Yes, and your hardware
And
too.
your
Right. Yeah. So which brings up a really big point, which we may have talked about a little bit earlier, but is acceptance of who you are. And I think that's the biggest part and the hardest part about therapy is, hey, I am wired a certain way, which has me makes me have certain tendencies, right? And makes me have certain reactions, make me act certain ways, especially in certain situations. And there's this resistance that a lot of us have towards that, where when we push against it and we fight it because we don't like it and we feel like it's a bad thing, instead of accepting that we have it and figuring out ways to deal with it and ways to either cope with it or have diffusion mechanisms or whatnot. You get what I'm talking about?
Right, because that would you'd actually have to sort of take responsibility for your actions rather than just dodging them or blaming it on something else. And that's painful and scary, and no one likes doing it. That's biologically that 99.9% of what we are is pain avoidance. And so we're trying to avoid anything painful or having to change or having to grow. And this is just this is the tricky part about being human, is it can actually be painful, but there are these joyous moments on the other side. So sometimes it's a delayed gratification to get to that joy.
Yes, and bringing up the concept of joy, that's one thing I definitely want us to talk about is something called the feeling wheel. Is a tool that I learned in therapy, which a lot of the things we're going to talk about, both within this therapy thing or just on our channel, Helpful for Life as a whole, I roll my eyes at myself. I laugh at, I think is cheesy. I mean, the thing is freaking called the feeling wheel, right? And especially, for the record, I don't think we mentioned this as part of our background. My parents are from the South. Both my parents are from Mississippi. I was born and raised in Texas. And, in case you don't know, general mental health trends and acceptance of people's feelings and stuff.
One of my parents is from Mars and the other is from Venus.
Nice. I like it. I thought you were going to say something about Uranus.
To a therapy book. No, I am the anus.
Okay.
I mean, wait.
Yes.
Never
So we come from these very southern, and you're New Mexican. Yeah. You're not old Mexican, but
no.
Yeah. So there's
modern Mexican.
Suave.
Sorry.
Yeah. There you go. So the point being is that I forgot the point. So let's jump back to our list here.
Like I said, baby steps. We're just getting back into it.
We're just getting back into it. Let's move over here back to this. Whoops. There we go. All right. So as a kid, powering through Fix Yourself Self-Help, the cost price, which I'll tell you right now, cost and price is something a lot of people use as an excuse, which I'm not going to minimize that fact, but there are plenty of ways for you to bridge that gap, and we will tell you guys about some of them, and we want to hear from you guys about other ways you can hear. Just a quick teaser, there's things called sliding scale pricing, there are clinics, and then, of course, there are through churches and other organizations, and again, we'll talk about the pros and cons of that, and schools, how you feel about therapy, Christian therapy, Jungian, Freud, CBT, the different types of therapy, results, from therapy and things like that, group versus individual. I think, one thing that, especially if you're resistant to therapy, just a quick teaser, I think group therapy is a great way to get into it, and hear other people talk about it. And that's the thing that in the emotional fitness class I took, a lot of that was hearing other people's stories and how other people, and then as you're doing that, it allows you, there's this concept of being too close to the problem, right? Mm-hmm. That's a big thing with therapy, especially if you're dealing with someone else in your life that you care about a lot. Like a great example is a mom and a son, right? And it's like, hi mom, I've had this happen many, many times where mom would tell me something, and I know whether this is as a kid or whether this was, a few months ago, where she'll tell me something, but I'm just not hearing it. Like I'm just literally not hearing it. And then now, fortunately, after time, and maybe not in that conversation still, but later on, I'm like, oh, okay, there was some truth to that. I see that now. So there's that problem about being too close to the problem. whether that be with someone else or with yourself, right? And so
Yeah,
that's
and
the power of group, is you get to see it and hear it from other people beside yourself.
And we can get into a lot of that, but some of it is the way your brain works. Is some of it is familiarity breeds contempt, but there's also the idea of being under pain and the stressors that lock down the way that your brain operates, right? So you can move from right to left hemisphere of your brain and how all that's going to... So we can talk about a lot of this stuff, and it should be kind of enlightening and fun to sort of dig through, mostly just so you can be aware when it shows up.
Yeah.
And then you can go, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can, develop a strategy around this.
And then even, so we haven't said these words specifically, but we will certainly be talking about it, the concept of mindfulness and meditation. I mean, and just from one example is breath work, and that's big spoiler alert for everyone. Like, if you're ever feeling some sort of way or you're having some sort of struggle in a conversation, like, just take a break, step outside, or even just where you're at, close your eyes and take some deep breaths, like for a few seconds. And we'll talk more about this later, but that actually literally changes what part of your brain you're using. And it shifts from that more animalistic stress response, fight, flight response, to the more logical part of your brain. And we'll talk a lot more about that and other things in your body too. Like, one thing about gut health and how that may be tied to how you think, and your diet and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which, since I mentioned diet, of course, I'm going to plug kickstartyourkitchen.com. I need to find my sound effect button. I'm out of practice. But go to kickstartyourkitchen.com to check out our very comprehensive course on everything in the kitchen, from cooking to meal planning to leftovers. Ew, gross. What's leftovers? Those suck. No, we'll tell you how to make good leftovers. We'll tell you all the gear you need. We'll tell you how to clean up. We'll tell you even a little bit about how to plate your food, how to make it look nice. And in the future, we're also going to talk about even things about how to host and how to take really good pictures of your food. So the whole bunch of good stuff over there, kickstartyourkitchen.com. Check it out, because as we've talked about today, your food, your diet literally affects your entire body, and obviously from health perspective, but that also affects your brain too.
Yeah.
And, we may or may not have talked about it already, but substances, drugs. We talked about it from a pharmaceutical and a psychiatrist provided one, but I definitely want to talk about it from the perspective of, hey, alcohol, weed, caffeine.
And I've never done acid, but or shrooms. But one of these days, I'm just like, from everything I've been reading lately, I probably need to do it. And then that makes me question the entire premise of that, right?
Yeah.
But those are all fun to get into.
Yeah, and just a fun little teaser, like my first involvement, one of the, spoiler alert, I lived a great life. I'm a upper middle class white dude who's straight. And I lived a really great life until I decided to quit my job and throw all sorts of problems into my life, which allowed me to learn a lot about myself and a lot about mental health. We'll talk a lot more about that later. But the first time that I realized what depression really was and really felt depression was actually after I tried a drug called ecstasy, which is a drug that makes you feel really good, but there's this effect where, because it floods your serotonin receptors, which is a fancy brain chemical we'll talk more about another day, a couple days later, your brain is actually depleted, and it's like, I don't know what to do. You flooded me with all this really good feeling stuff, and now it all goes away. So you actually feel a little bit depressed, and it's like, hey, and that being depressed in a feeling or in a sentence is, oh, I feel bad or I feel sad, and I may even recognize that I feel bad or sad, but I can't do something. I don't feel like I can do something to change it.
Right.
And so, there's also the good or bad about drugs, alcohol, or whatnot affecting how you feel, and that's worth definitely exploring. Okay, so body health, medication, which we conveniently just talked on a little bit. The feeling logic spectrum, wherever you go, there you will be. Effect on others. So that one, I don't know how much I talked about, but that is, hey, how you are and the way you act and the way you interact with other people is going to affect how the people around you act and how the other and what they do. And that's a big thing about dealing with mental health and therapy is, the best way to increase awareness in your friend group or your family group is to lead the way yourself. Just do it and start trying things and start rubbing off on people. And a big example with this is something called boundaries, which we have an episode where we talked about boundaries that will link. slight distraction.
Yeah.
But the idea of a boundary, which is, hey, you person are treating me a certain way or doing something to me, which is going to happen a lot, especially with family and close friends. And I no longer accept that you're going to be able to do that. And here is the boundary where I'm saying you can't do that anymore. And if you do that, here are the consequences. And so we have a whole episode just on that. And they're very important.
Yeah. It's one of those things you have to learn as you get older too, right? Is this idea of self-protection, but also not using that to be manipulative or to imbue others with guilt.
Right.
Like it's a tricky line to cross. And so sometimes being in groups or therapy or something like that can really help you moderate that line instead of using it as a weapon.
Yes, which also makes me think of one big thing that I've realized, especially as more of my friends get, up on this subject, is one hard thing that people got to realize is that not everyone's at the same level of education you are on this subject. And you can't expect everyone to be at that level of education.
Oh, and there's education and then there's like emotional maturity, right? So we've got two different things rocking there because this is one of our societal things. We split up intelligence as smarts and we privilege that, but being emotionally secure and stable, that's not going to get you a great job most of the time, right? So we have this kind of tendency to break those two apart. But I mean, I think really what we'd want at the end of the day is for those to somehow be merged for our own personal health. But I don't think that's actually going to help you in your job. To be a balanced individual most often is not the thing your job is looking for. They want you to be all in and neurotic about them.
Yes, and which is a great thing we're going to talk about is the workplace and how mental health and therapy plays into that. And, and there's just kind of this overall concept of, okay, seeing a lot of people, especially in America, we have a tendency to see things as black and white. Oh, I could do this or I could do that. I could be on the left or I could be on the right. And, you could take that a million different ways, right? But the reality is part of mental health and therapy is helping you realize that there are more options than you think you might have in whatever situation you're in. It's not just can I do A or can I do B. There are a lot of ways you can deal with the thing. And that's also part of therapy. And as you're getting into it, and a big encouraging statement I have for you is if you start getting into therapy or mental health and it's not working for you, try a different method. Don't give up altogether. Like, well, I'm not going to work on it anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is like the first time I tried to cook and just decided this isn't for me.
Which I'm going to plug one more time. Helpful.
Yeah, right.
Kickstarterkitchen.com.
It was the same as the first time I tried to stop drinking.
Yeah.
It just didn't work, so I just gave up stopping trying.
Right? It was a tough day. It's like, I tried.
It's a tough 2 hours.
Yeah. Okay, so the effect on others, the resistance from ourselves, negatives about therapy, individuality, multiplicity of self, normalization, community, causes for where we're at, what types of therapy, when to try a different therapist, things like that, which therapist, habits and routines, which, big spoiler alert, whether that's mental health therapy, trying to accomplish something in your life, trying to improve your relationship, trying to improve your cooking, trying to improve literally anything in your life, it all comes back to habits and routines. Spoiler alert right there. And if you want to look at anyone or most people who are successful, especially in a sustainable way for a very long time, whether they're a professional athlete, an actor, a businessman, whatever, any area of life, they probably have a good bit of systems and habits and routines and probably someone there to help them, to help coach them, support them, and they probably have support systems in place to help them deal with stuff. And all that being said, it's worth noting there are plenty of people who are very successful despite themselves. And you could be an amazing CEO but have a horrible family life, or you could have no money in the world but be the happiest person ever, right? So like that's a big part.
This is an argument we will get to bring up, which I have heard from somebody that I really love and enjoy being around, is they're like, yeah, but if I fixed all that stuff, I probably wouldn't be successful anymore. And I was like, or you'd be more successful.
Right.
Like this becomes the problem is if you've been successful, it's like, well, I don't want to change anything because if it ain't broke, but it probably is broke because I'm having all this fallout in other parts of my life, but I'm successful in this realm, right? So at that point, maybe we're talking about the T person. Right?
Yeah.
They're down here being hyper successful, and the more energy they pump into that well or that hole that they've dug for themselves, then the harder it gets to get out because your entire identity becomes wrapped up in being successful.
Yeah, and I'll say, you could be a T person and not have that problem,
yes.
But that is a good example. And then to dive into the art world that you live in a little bit, same kind of concept comes up a lot. Well, it's like, well, I do my best work when I'm high or when I'm really drunk or when I go off and do this thing. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's one way you found, but that's okay.
Or
But
I do my best work whenever I create a relationship and then sabotage the
Yeah.
relationship so that I can feel the pain.
I can
of
feel the
loss.
pain. Yes, yes. That's where
I'm
all good music
depressed
comes from.
again.
You can't
Yeah.
be a good art without being a broken person.
No, that's exactly it.
Yes, which another conversation we'll have someday is, can you separate the art from the artist? We're going to have to talk about that sometime.
Man, that's gonna be a doozy.
Yes,
Yeah.
maybe a series too. So neuroplasticity, which is a fancy word for saying that your brain can change and the different pathways you have, and literally every time you learn something or change a behavior or anything, your brain is physically changing. How age is a factor on this, when you get into it, when you start thinking about it, dealing with friends, social anxiety, holidays, parties. And then coming down to our last list here, the coping mechanisms, how that may carry from being a kid into, coping mechanisms as a child, turning into your, what was that phrase you said?
Dysfunctions
Dysfunctions as an adult. Yep.
Yeah.
The concept of generational issues, where you learn about mental health and therapy, where you learn about it and the pros and cons of different ways, things to look out for, how it's worked its way into media, TV shows, movies, things like that. The concept of learning the language, attachment theory, accepting who we are, taking responsibility. The word that's an important one. Don't know what the rest of that was. We'll figure that out
How
later.
did you define that?
Yeah.
Drugs.
Drugs.
So this is existentialism.
Uh-huh.
We'll get into
The drugs, including psychedelics, but even including just caffeine, alcohol, and weed. And also the concept of self-medication, which is tied into that. Recognizing everyone ain't woke, even if you are, and how it works in the workplace. And then lastly, just the fact that dealing with mental health and dealing with therapy, just like many other things, is a skill. And so, like most skills, unless you're like me, who's just good at everything.
There we go.
Yeah, got to lean into it. Then, when you first do something, when you first try something, you're probably not going to be good at it. And therapy and mental health is one of that. And it's even supercharged even more because it's such an emotional thing, because it really gets at your identity of who you are. And that, like on a psychological level, is very deep. And if you don't know what I mean by attacking someone on like a very personal level of who they are, try and talk to someone who's really big into a sport, say an Alabama football fan, and just go up to him and say like, hey, Tennessee beat you guys last week. How'd that go? And see the interactions that you get on their face. And then of course, politics and religion. The reason that these things like are so triggering for people and they're so hard to talk about in the holidays and around the Thanksgiving table and such is because they're a part of people's identities. So,
Yeah.
all right, so we've got this big old mess of a list here.
Let's we're gonna have to go through, and maybe y'all can help us, but let's clean this up a bit, drop it into some sections or chunks.
Yeah. So I think what we'll do is offline we'll take this and we'll turn it into legible words, not just read chicken scratch, and then we will kind of shape this into a handful of different kind of topics. But before we do that, and of course, we reserve the right to completely change this and not do this at all. But what do you think about for our next episode? For the next episode, what do you think is a good place for us to start around all of this?
I think the more compelling ones might be the ones that are more revealing more about our vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Might help people sort of be able to stomach the rest of it. But I'm also really interested in the mechanism of how therapy came about, almost like a historical grounding. And maybe we could do that very quickly, like a 10-minute really compact thing where it's just like, this is the way therapy started, this is how it's grown, and give some facts about how it functions. Because I think that can provide a framework that allows people to sort of see how and why it works today and why it's such a big influence. I have multiple thoughts on it, but I'm open to whatever. I think that having the feeling stuff in there is probably good, but naturally I also want to avoid it and go logical. So what you're witnessing right now is that contradiction where I'm like, can we just do them both at the same time? Can I make everybody happy?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say that I think one thing we're going to aim for with that first episode is, I don't think we're going to dive crazy deep into any one thing because, again, we want this to be very approachable for you, regardless of what your background in this is. So I like the idea of talking a little bit about the history of it, and also maybe a little bit about why we are where we are today in the society, and especially in America. And then, yeah, I think just maybe some introductions of how some easy first steps you can take on a mental health journey, and of course, for some people that might be getting into therapy, but for other people, maybe that's something along the lines of breath work or meditation or mindfulness or things like that, which I forgot to plug earlier, but we actually have recorded 2 meditations with one of our new collaborators. Her name is Megan. So we'll share links to that below when we publish those within the next week or so. But there's 2. There's one is a gong therapy, and we have these special microphones that makes it sound like you're in the room when you wear headphones. So it's really cool. And I mean, it's not going to be the same as in person because you literally, when you're in there, you feel the vibrations of this very large gong like going off your body. It's really cool. And she says it's kind of like a cheat code to meditation or mindfulness. And she says it's a great place for people to start if they've never done it before, because literally you just got to, sit there and listen.
Yeah, well, and you also get to say gong.
Yeah, yeah, you do
which
get to
is,
say gong.
Bonus.
Yeah,
right there.
yeah, I like
yeah,
that
and there's
one.
also like scream therapy, right, where people scream out their feelings. Like,
Yeah.
I wonder what that. I don't know.
Oh,
That's
for
gonna be
sure.
intense.
And then another
Yeah.
thing that, people hear meditation like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not do that. But there's many different types. And actually, some of the ways I've resonated with most are not what you would traditionally think of as meditation. And one of those is literally just listening to music. And like I actually had one time where I listened to a song on repeat, and I hate repetition, by the way. I'm the type of guy who always wants to do something new and learn something new. But I just happened to listen to a song on repeat for like 20 minutes one time, and I just got into this state where I was just like thinking and feeling and processing, and I was like, wow, I'd never tried that before, and I would never have said, hey, Reed, try this, I bet it'll be great. And then I would have been like, no, you're an idiot. But it was really powerful for me. And there's other things too, like, I mean, I know you like wood, so why don't you talk about that? Is that meditative for you at all, working with your wood?
These are hobbies and activities that are physical in nature. It's also one of the things I do with art, right? So I have a background in art, and doing things that are hand-based, that are refinements, that are craft-based. It does this thing where it stops your self-identification mode. So it basically silences your ego while you're working on these things, and that you can get zoned into these repetitive tasks, and it can all of a sudden, you're doing these constant slow refinements, and you focus so much on this other thing that when you sort of snap out of it, maybe 30 or 40 minutes have gone by, but you feel great.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird. It's the way the human brain works. And so we can talk more about that too, because there's entire books written on that subject.
And there's this is at least dancing around, if not talking about directly, the concept of something called a flow state. Mm-hmm. And again, since I'm a nerd, I'll go ahead and mention out there for you other nerds, video games. Video games can be a similar type of thing for this. I'll just go ahead and mention Minecraft. Great for zoning out and great for kind of getting into that repetitive motion where you're not actively thinking and you just kind of get into this zone. Cleaning, believe it or not, is another great way. And then driving. That's one that everyone's like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to commute anymore. I'm like, well, you didn't realize all the functions that your commute actually had for you. Give you that time to prepare for work, to get yourself mentally ready versus just rolling out in your panties and going and sitting in front of your computer. Like, you had that time where you forced yourself to get ready both mentally and physically, and then you have that time in the car. Well, that driving is one of those activities you don't really have to think about that much. And so that's one of my favorite times to think, actually, is especially on long road trips. So clearly there's a lot we can talk about here, as you guys can see, and we sprinkled in about 1,000 different nuggets of things. So we really do want to hear from you guys. I'm going to be going out of town next week, so we'll be meeting up probably in 2 weeks from now, roughly. Mm-hmm. And I want that to give you guys some time to think about this, to watch this, to reflect. I want you guys to ask what questions do you have about mental health, about therapy? What thoughts do you have? Tell me why you think it's a horrible idea. Like, this is meant to be a discussion, and I don't want you guys to hold anything back. And our goal here is to listen to you guys and shape this into a conversation that is extremely useful for you, and also hopefully extremely useful for your friends and your family. And that's one thing that I would encourage you guys, like, don't be afraid to ask someone to watch this with you. Like, that's been honestly very life-changing for me was when we started the show, because I realized, like, you know what? I've been very good at consuming information and watching things and reading things and listening to things. But one thing that I really unlocked a different part of me was when we started sitting here behind these microphones and we started talking about all these things that we've learned and read about elsewhere. And I'm like, I'd never really done that before with other people. And I never really thought that much about it. But it was like, now that I've done that, like, I intentionally try and do that with more and more people. I'm like, hey, here are these things I've learned about. Here are these things I saw. And it's not just like, not that there's anything wrong with this, right? But it's not just, hey, did you see that Game of Thrones episode? It's talking a little deeper about some things.
Yeah, it's the producing is a part of our society we should get into that whole cycle too. How much we consume, how much we produce, and then what comes back out of us, right? And this is another thing about therapy, that if you're consuming things about mental health and about personal health, then I think that should have an effect on what you produce, what comes back out of you. So a lot of this is focus, and whatever, that old adage, like, poop in, poop out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things, like, so let's, focus on sort of cleaning up that cycle.
Yes. And so one thing that we do on all of our What the Hell is Water episodes is we give you guys a challenge of one small thing that you can do to improve your life directly today. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a cheat code. It's a very simple playbook that you're going to roll your eyes and be like, Reed, that's not really going to help. Or, oh, Reed, I know these things. But one of the biggest things about mental health and therapy is there's a big difference between knowing something and doing something. And again, it comes back to those habits and routines. One thing I'll plug is the science of happiness. There's a professor at Yale, I believe, who started this class a few years back on the science of happiness, and it got over-enrolled at their school, and like, wow, we might be onto something. People are interested in this. So then they actually ended up making it a free online course that anyone could take. It's called The Science of Happiness, and she also has a podcast. And so she is smarter than us. She does know the science of these types of things, but she even says, she's like, hey, look, you guys think that I'm happy all the time? Hell no. Like, just because I know these things does not mean that I do these things, right? And so that's part of it. So that's a big thing about, I think you made an allusion for it earlier about, it's about the journey, not the end goal. Yeah. And so recognize that you're going to stumble, you're going to fall, and it's kind of like a roller coaster. Just try and make that roller coaster trend upwards, right? And the reason I brought that up was my long aside as to your actions today and the simple checklist. If you want to improve in life, if you want to have better mental health, better relationships, if you want to be healthier, it's really a very simple checklist. Get enough sleep. Like, I know so many of you are rolling your eyes at me right now, but there's truth in it. And there's a Queen Herbie song, which we'll share in the future. It's actually another great meditation. I think it's called Good Morning by Queen Herbie. Queen is with a V. And it's a 5-minute song, which you could use as a meditation. And it goes through this journey of, at first, it's like living and acknowledging all of this bad stuff that happened. And then the next part of the song transitions into releasing that, recognizing that stuff doesn't serve you, and moving on into the day. Mm-hmm. And one of the things she says is she talks about sleep, and she's like describes it in this way. I'm like, yeah, that makes me respect sleep much more. And it's like, there's this magical thing that rejuvenates your life force through every single cell of your body. And it's like, yeah, it sounds cheesy, but that's literally what sleep is doing. Not to mention all of the processing and stuff that goes on in your head. I mean, any 2 cents on sleep?
No, I'm a fan of it. I actually call it meditation.
I
meditate for 8 hours
every day.
Every day.
Yeah. So get a good sleep. Change your notification settings on your phone. I know that's not a struggle for everyone, but I know that's a huge struggle for a lot of people. And guess what? One of the big tricks for getting good sleep is putting your phone away and not having it in the bedroom with you. And eat well. And doing those 3 things, that's going to get you a good chunk of the way there. I can't tell you how many stories of someone having a bad day or a bad mental health struggle or something, dealt with them not having enough sleep, not eating well, or having to do something with, some sort of drug or alcohol or something like that. And then it's like, hey, if you just start with those, you're going to be ahead of, honestly, 90% of people.
Yeah. I think that's all good advice. Now, the tricky part is, and we'll get into this more, but when you're depressed, all those things are amazing feats to overcome.
Yes.
Like, to get to sleep is tricky. Like, so we can talk about
We'll talk
all
more
that in
about
future
that.
episodes.
Yes, for sure. So to narrow down the challenge to be one thing for you guys, it is to clean up your sleep schedule. Give yourself a bedtime today and put away all of your devices and all of your electronics 1 hour before you want to go to sleep, and develop some sort of routine, whether it's brushing your teeth, getting into your jammies, turning down the lights. I like to turn off all of my lights, or at least dim them down in the hours before I go to sleep, to help my brain. There's something called the circadian rhythm. We'll talk more about this some other day, I'm sure. But it's like, hey, there's not the sun anymore. It's time to go to bed. So putting the physical habits in place to help you get to sleep. So set yourself a bedtime and put all of your electronics and turn your lights down 1 hour before you want to go to sleep. That's your challenge for today. And if you're like, oh, Reed, I can't do that today. Okay, fine. Well, just pick another day on your calendar and put it in your calendar and set a reminder and do that. And even better, do that for like 2 weeks, and you might be surprised just how much that can affect your life and change your life. And I know that was a big thing for me, and I know it could be a big thing for you guys. Any final parting thoughts here, Ryder?
No, kind of looking forward to it. This could go on forever because the topic is endless.
Yes. Yeah. So you guys heard it here first. You should be excited because Ryder is kind of looking forward to it. So with that,
yeah. I am a robot. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.